All right. So fair warning that we're recording as of now. I will kick us off with a brief intro here before we get to the good part. Again, welcome to our virtual quality talk for this month. Hope everybody had a good month of August. I know I certainly tried to get out and enjoy the nice weather as much as possible. As always, we'll thank D2L for letting us continue to use their corporate Zoom account for these events. And again, if you are looking for a way to stay in touch with us, following us on Twitter is always a good option, and we're at KWSQA. Just a reminder of all the fantastic folks behind the scenes who work hard on bringing you these events and keeping our organization up and running. So big thanks to all of these people. We've got our next few quality talks planned out, so I thought I'd share those with you. We have events planned in October, November, and January, though as usual, we'll take a break for the month of December because last week of December is probably not a great time to get together and do stuff like this. But we do have the next 3 planned out for you here. But after January, we do have some more available slots. So if you are thinking of maybe putting together a talk for sometime in winter 2022 timeframe, we'd love to hear from you. We've got a CFP form available via our website. So go check that out and let us know what your idea is, what you're thinking, and we'll be in touch. Another way you can get involved with our organization is if you would like to host a virtual testing games event with us. And again, if you visit our website, there is a form there you can fill out to tell us a bit more about you and your organization and what you're hoping to get out of hosting an event with us. And again, we'd love to hear from you. We do have some availability to help organize some of these events in the coming months. I'll say my usual thing about our sustaining memberships as well too. So they are $20 and available from our website as well. Why you would buy one of these memberships in 2021, given that all of our events are free and online and don't require you to have a membership, would be that if you want to be eligible to vote for or run in the board of directors election, or if you just want to support our organization and help us out during these times where we haven't been able to host any kind of regular in-person events that generate income for us. But the election stuff is particularly relevant because that is actually coming pretty soon. We're getting to the time of year where we will hold our election, and actually call for nominations is going to start in a few days. So October 1st is when we'll open that up. If you or someone you know is thinking of running for a spot on the KWSQA board in the coming year, this is your chance. You just need to make sure that you are a member. So as I mentioned, you'll need to purchase one of those sustaining memberships. Ultimately, we'll be announcing the results of the election on December 1st. I believe this is also the date that we've chosen to hold our annual general meeting this year. So stay tuned for more information on that. But for now, the thing you need to know is that call for nominations is happening soon, and we'll send more communications through our usual channels, mailing list and Twitter when we have the place where you can go to submit a nomination all set up. Oh, I already said all of these things. Okay. Otherwise, just a reminder, as usual, that our code of conduct for the KWSQA does apply to our virtual events in just the same way as it did in our in-person events. Anytime, if you have questions or need to report an incident, please do reach out to us. You can get in touch via info@kwsqa.org. And if you want to read the full version of the code of conduct, you can find that on our website too. So for today, we've got a great presentation lined up for you, and we anticipate having plenty of time for audience Q&A as well. I believe the presenters are also open to taking Q&A like during the presentation as well. You don't have to hold your questions till the end. And a reminder again that we love to hear your feedback. It's really helpful for us in terms of planning our future events. So if you fill out the feedback survey that you'll receive after the meeting, then we'll enter you for a chance to win an Amazon gift card. All right, so at this point, I'll introduce Blake and Graeme, who are here today to talk to us about engineering team metrics that matter. You'll probably recognize Graeme as one of the current KWSQA board members, so great to have him here in sort of two roles at once today. At this point, I'll turn it over to them to tell you more.
Awesome, thanks, Tina. I'm just going to take one quick moment and get the share going, and then we'll introduce and get started. Okay, perfect. So, I mean, thanks for everyone for being here today, and you know, we're excited that you're interested in what we have to say about engineering metrics that we think matter. So we'll talk through this today. As Tina said, if you have any questions, you can throw them in the chat, or you can unmute and feel free to ask them. We'd be happy to discuss. We are talking about engineering team metrics that matter. And just right before we do intros, I'm gonna let Blake run with this, but just a quick, you know, explanation. We are, as we talk about engineering team metrics that matter, throughout the slide, you'll see references to engineers. And what we really are using that term for is to represent anybody on a team that is building and delivering software. So that can be in any capacity. So we're using this catch-all term engineer, but please feel free to swap in your role or your coworkers' roles or the peers that you work with, and all of that is viable. So in terms of who we are, as Tina mentioned, my name is Graeme. You might recognize me as a board member here, but I also spend time as an engineering manager at Circle CI, managing the data insights team, which is one feature team as part of the larger Circle CI product. And I have with me today, Blake.
Hi, everybody. My name is Blake Walters. As it says here, you know, I'm a director of data and growth engineering at Circle CI. So for me, Graeme is one of, I think, 5-ish teams that report to me currently, and my scope of work includes the data product side of Circle CI's product teams, and then the growth engineering side. So as we go through this, we're kind of repurposing this deck for a slightly different audience. The original target audience for this deck was analysts, industry analysts, explaining kind of our thoughts on what metrics we think matter to engineering teams. And these are engineering teams as a whole, as far as the business is concerned. It's really important that all of these things are understood by the entirety of engineering teams. It's deeply cross-functionally, from engineers to testers, to product managers, to user researchers, to designers, anyone that comes across a feature or product that's being released to customers. So with all that said, we'll kind of launch into it, but really the crux of the whole deck, the whole presentation is, why is it so hard for engineering teams to measure their value? And from the business standpoint, you know, more and more businesses these days, this should be no surprise to anybody in this room, are really heavily investing in engineering. We kind of joke internal to Circle CI that, you know, even the most stalwart old companies, gigantic retail, finance, mom and pop stores all across the world are becoming software businesses. Either they're producing software, they're consuming software as a key part of their success. You know, Amazon is a really fantastic success story of a company that started off as a actual bookseller. I can remember buying books from Amazon when I was in college, to one of the world's most powerful software development and delivery companies. For their retail chain, for their logistics, all the way up through, you know, AWS and all their offerings. But measuring the value of an engineering team and the work we do is important. We have to be able to say we did X, we got Y from it. And so coming up with, you know, concrete measures for how we think about that success is difficult. So we've tried our best to encapsulate these into a bunch of different areas, but really they kind of fall into these two very specific areas of growth. The first one I chuckle at because it seems really obvious, but just getting good. Nobody steps up to the task of just releasing a thing and magically snaps their fingers and it comes together. It's a practice, it's a craft, it's something that we can hone day in and day out, and do that by measuring what works and what doesn't. It's really things like reducing the time to change, reducing the risk, increasing ability to chase what works, and honestly abandoning what doesn't work, getting the cruft out of the way. And then the second is really measuring that return on investment. So when you plug in an input, when you release a feature, when you release a new product line, whatever the case may be, how do we know how much that thing costs and what we're getting from it? What impact is it having? And being able to have teams really keep these things in mind as they're building software, as they're releasing stuff to customers, so that they can make decisions that are closer to the work that they are doing at any given time. So next slide, Graeme. And then really, these are just the three main areas. So my role as a director of engineering, specifically at Circle CI, is I'm kind of the conduit for the business as it pertains to engineering teams. Most of my role is strategic direction setting and translating what the business needs into what teams work on. And then, my partners like Graeme are the ones that go out and execute that vision. So I'm really be talking about the business metric side of things. And then Graeme's going to take it over from a line management side of what we think about in terms of velocity metrics, and what I think is the most interesting one is morale metrics, getting people to care about the things that they're working on for better results. So diving right into the business metric side of things, and again, if anybody has any questions that come up from this, please, I would try to keep an eye on chat, so we can interrupt at any time. But from the business metric standpoint, and this is very true of product companies, but I think widely true of anybody that's delivering anything, whether your customer is a person that's paying a subscription to buy your thing, to an internal customer, if it's a platform team working on a piece of enablement software for another engineering team, or data engineers working to deliver reports to the rest of the business, whatever it is. But it really should be possible to draw a direct line from every task an engineer takes to a top line business metric. That's easier said than done, but it's an incredibly valuable tool to really hone in on what we're working on as teams. Engineering teams often fall into the trap of building things to build things. And we don't want to do that. We want to make sure that we really are building things that have benefit to our customers, that have measurable returns. So we really break these business metrics down into understanding the growth of the company and where it's headed, funnel metrics, which I'll get to, and ultimately driving end user value. So Graeme, next slide. So on the growth of the company, it's fundamentally having engineering teams be aware of how quickly the business is scaling. And that's intentionally broad, right? It's we want to make sure that we know how our customer base is scaling, how the thing that we're building is going to need to accept the influx of users, orders, whatever the case may be, so that it doesn't crumble under its own weight. We want to be just ahead of the scale that we're trying to provide for whoever's consuming our thing. But we also want to be cognizant of how our organization itself is growing to support small startups like Circle CI was 10-ish years ago, that have a handful of people, can easily operate under, oh, I literally know everybody in this company. I don't need to write anything down because I can just go tap them on the shoulder. These days, we're about 600 people. It is literally impossible to know everybody in the company. And there's companies I'm sure represented here that have, tens of thousands of people. So understanding where your company is at a given time and where it's headed means you can stay just ahead of that growth curve. And when I say staying just ahead of that growth curve, I do really mean just ahead. We don't want to be planning for 100x growth over the next year, whether that's usage or customers or team size, if we're only going to see 10x growth or even 2x growth. It's making sure that because we're just ahead, we're building the things that we need to get the job done with a little bit of overhead in case there's wild success in any one given spot, to absorb that impact, but not over-engineering or overbuilding our products and our features and our workflows for a use case that may never come, because there's really an opportunity cost associated with that. The more time we're spending investing in scale that we'll never realize is time taken away from the number of times that we can, take a swing at a new product feature or be a little bit riskier in pushing out a new workflow. Next slide. And so funnel metrics, this one's really fascinating. It's very near and dear to my heart on the growth side of the engineering teams that I work with, but really understanding how changes affect the way the end customers engage with your product. And so product here, kind of like Graeme said, that we're using the term engineers loosely. We're using product exceptionally loosely, because a product could be, again, a report. It could be, a piece of software. It could be a testing workflow, or the output of a test cycle. But engineers and engineering teams really need to understand the bigger picture of how users are behaving and whether or not changes are going to have a positive or negative impact for that business. So when you release a feature, when you work on something, it's not good enough that it works. It needs to solve a problem that your team is, or that your team's customers are having, whether it's novel or interesting or complementary to what your product is doing. You really need to make sure that it's focused on what the end user is using. And oftentimes we can kind of put blinders on. It's kind of like writing the first draft of a paper. You really stop seeing all the spelling mistakes because you know what you're trying to say, but really putting on that lens of this is how the customer is going to use this thing, being empathetic with them and really reaching for changes that are positive, or at least minimizing negatively impacting changes. But yeah, make sure oh yeah, so Graeme will talk about velocity metrics, about chasing those positive behaviors in a bit. But really this is focusing at a grand scale. If you understand how your team or how your customers are using the work that your teams are doing, you can really empower decision-making at the lowest possible level and increase speed to delivery time. And then so the last metric is end user value, and it really is directly tied to the previous one, but making sure that engineering teams themselves have the shared value of delivering code, delivering work that's useful to the end user. And this goes back to not just engineering for engineering's sake, not just doing things to do them, but really to tie that line back to what users are getting from it. So everything we ship, in Circle CI, we're big proponents of Agile. We're big proponents of continuous delivery, consciously shipping towards users each and every day, and if not every day, then every week. But making sure that we're having an impact on that customer. So even things down to a refactor, or even looking at the metrics that Graeme's going to talk about in a minute on the velocity metric side. It's really making sure that we're doing these things with purpose, with the reason that we all have the shared aligned value of focusing on the end user. And then knowing the top level business metrics really helps engineers understand what their potential impact could be. And this is a thing that, every link between somebody on an engineering team all the way up through the CEO have a part in, because the further away you get from top line business, we can say revenue all day long, or we can say, reduced downtime, but really understanding what those top level metrics are and how to trace that thread all the way back from the work that you and your teams are working on, all the way up to what you're trying to achieve as a business. And so with that, that's all the fun businessy things. I'll turn it over to Graeme to talk about velocity metrics and how they're important to teams themselves.
Sure, sounds good. Thanks, Blake. So the velocity metrics and to some degree the morale metrics that we're going to talk about really come down to that kind of lower level individual team impact and how we can measure their ability to deliver on kind of the business values that Blake's been talking about. So these kind of fall down, the velocity metrics, the different ways to measure speed and efficiency that software delivery is happening. So moving through that delivery pipeline, they kind of break down into roughly 3 buckets. Time metrics specifically, so how long it takes for actions to happen or things to happen. Volume metrics around throughput and frequencies, and then agile metrics, which shouldn't be a surprise to anybody here, but there's maybe a couple in here that are interesting, or some insights that we can get out of these metrics that would be interesting. There's a quote on the slide from Sergey, who's a product development services engineer at Contentful. And something that I really like about what he had to say was that teams can look at these metrics and reflect upon the impact that changes in their process or behaviors are happening, and then determine if those are desirable or not, and continue to invest in them or throw them away. And that's really the purpose of this. You'll see a lot of these metrics. We don't actually try to, or even make an attempt at describing a baseline or where people should be or what target you should be driving towards. It's much more thinking about how changes in behavior or process can impact these and whether that's desirable or not. And we'll talk about that with a few of these metrics in a minute. So one of the metrics is duration and cycle time. So measuring the length of time it actually takes for any given process, whether that is a human process or a computer process like a CI build to run. Shorter durations will inevitably result in shorter feedback loops, which helps teams improve focus, improve their ability to course correct if things are going off the rails. And we notice that long cycle times of any process means at the end of that, we can use that output, but how long does it take for us to get that back into the system and actually realize change from that? One of the things that we want to be really mindful of when we're talking about durations and cycle times is that there can be a floor to this metric, and it's something that we have to keep in mind as we continue to try and optimize. Generally, optimizing for duration will impact team members' abilities to discover, debug, and fix issues, which could negatively impact delivery in ways that we didn't necessarily consider up front. So, I mean, my favorite example of this, and hopefully this resonates with this crowd, but we can look at our build times and say, gosh, those are taking a long time. We'd like to reduce them. And the test stage is the thing that's taking the longest. So why don't we just cut that? Sure, we can effectively reduce our build time. We've reduced the feedback loop in time, but what we've done is missed a whole bunch of signal that we actually want to make use of in terms of quality or things we actually need to make real change on that we didn't want to deliver to customers. So always being mindful of reducing time is good, but not at the expense of some of the other metrics that we're talking about or we try to capture and measure as a team. So the next metric that we talk about is throughput. If you're not familiar with throughput, measuring the average number of daily changes to a system. We measure this directly as commit frequency and just observing how often changes are introduced into the system. But there's multiple checkpoints where you can kind of measure for change being introduced and what the throughput of that is. There's a couple of views that, so when we talk about measuring commit frequency, there's a couple of views that we'll use that make sense for us. We can take a look at kind of the commit frequency and throughput across all of the branches that our team is working on for kind of a full picture of what engineering productivity looks like. How quickly are we just delivering value into the system? It might not be our main branch and it might not be getting deployed, but just change happening. But we can also kind of zero in on our main branch and get a picture of the throughput of our customer impacting delivery. So how frequently are we putting changes in that the customers can actually make use of? And again, no matter the number, measuring this throughput just gets us to a baseline of engineering activity that we can use to inform future decisions. So we're not specifying a target here. It's just understanding where we are at so we can identify if this number trends in a direction or the other and what reasons we might have for seeing that change. Having this number as an average also helps us forecast our productivity, monitor for changes in that, and maybe try and correlate to upsets or things that have not gone the way we intended and what work didn't get done as a result of that. So just a further calculation about the value that we're delivering and the speed at which we're delivering it. When we talk about deployment frequency, if you're, I guess, a truly continuous deployment or continuous delivery model, this would match your throughput of your main branch, but that doesn't necessarily have to remain true. This number will be different for teams with different deployment and delivery strategies. We know that one size does not fit all. And whether you're an organization that can't, for particular reasons, either customer reasons or infrastructural reasons or system reasons why you don't necessarily want to pursue continuous delivery, there is still a number, and that could be, are we delivering once a year? And if so, that's our baseline. And what does it take to get us to deploy or deliver twice a year? And kind of taking those incremental steps to just see that trend change in the direction that we want it to. So we know that deploying lots of updates per day doesn't necessarily directly translate to high quality work, but tracking that frequency does help us measure the speed and our ability to make those changes, which is also kind of a measure of reaction. So that can actually have a non-direct correlation to quality as well. We talk about change lead time, so measuring how long it takes to deliver an idea from its inception to a customer. That's the full start to finish timeline. This includes more than just kind of the time spent coding, but actually kind of expands the time measure to all of feature development, even as much as, tickets get created but sitting in a backlog and don't actively get worked on. That the measure of that stage is also important for understanding when we have an idea, what does it take and how long to get it into the hands of customers and actually realize any ROI from that idea. So just being able to use this measure, to take a critical look at each step of the process and understand, is this where we need to optimize, or is this okay for now? And should we turn our attention to another time or another stage of the cycle if the times aren't kind of lining up with what we would like? So there's a quote here from Alex at Puppet, but he talks about recommending breaking up lead time into stages, very granular levels, monitoring those over time, and then looking at that whole life cycle to understand, what pieces matter to us. Is it okay that we have lots of ideas in the backlog that take a long time to be executed on, or is that really the bottleneck and we've got tons of great ideas, but they're not getting executed on, and that slows the rest of our delivery process down? So as far as agile metrics, I don't think sprint velocity will be surprising to anybody who's worked in an agile environment. We will use this to approximate the amount of work that teams should be able to tackle in a single sprint by measuring, sprint over sprint, how many points they're delivering on. So it is kind of a snapshot approximation of the amount of work the team can tackle, but that's useful for sprint planning, longer term forecasting around how long a particular epic or initiative or feature or deliverable will take to deliver for a specific team. Story points and sprint velocity doesn't really translate well from team to team. So this is a very specific individual team measure to be able to see predictability and forecast what we can deliver upon. But we don't use this to measure teams against each other or kind of like pit these metrics against each other, because it just doesn't make sense. It's not a very concrete thing that we would want to compare. That would actually be a very detrimental behavior. So making sure we understand that this measure is for a team, for specific team predictability. When my team is doing sprint planning, this is the first metric we jump to help us kind of forecast what we think we could roughly do in a sprint before we do additional tweaking and tuning, using additional metrics to kind of zero in on what we think is a reasonable amount of work to tackle. And so what that looks like is using some of these other metrics. So understanding our velocity over time and our sprint commit to achieved ratio is kind of things that further help us understand what we're going to tackle in a given sprint and sprint over sprint. So measuring velocity over time is measuring the work completed during a sprint, over some period of time. And then we can look further at kind of our sprint to commit achieved ratio, which measures the number of commits, it measures our commitment to accomplishing the work versus how much we actually accomplished. These are really good metrics that we can kind of use in concert, for planning and forecasting. So when you look at them together, they kind of paint a picture of a team's efficiency and their ability to deliver. Is that happening predictably? Is it changing? But is that change predictable or is it unpredictable? So a good example of this is if a team is constantly overcommitting to story points or kind of sprint velocities and then under delivering, if we dive in on that, we might assume that they're trying to increase their delivery capacity. They're trying to deliver more in a given sprint over sprint. Maybe they're being asked to stretch, or there's a deliverable out on the horizon that they would like to get to at a specific delivery time, but something is making that difficult to move. So we can see, hey, the team wants to commit to more. They're trying to increase their velocity, but there is a blocker there. And so let's lean into the other metrics that we have that we're measuring to help us understand what is that blocker? Why are we unable to increase our velocity? Is it a particular stage we've introduced in the development pipelines? Is it external factors? And really use that to understand if we want to change, but we want to change predictably. And if we can't do that, we need to understand why. Oh, I guess that's it for velocity metrics. I'll just take a quick look at the chat and make sure we didn't miss any questions. Okay, and so the last category might be a little surprising for some people to see in terms of talking about metrics for engineering teams, but we actually think it's quite important. So morale metrics. In general, capturing the happiness of team members in their role, but also their kind of happiness level or their confidence or pride levels in what is being produced as a team. So we have kind of 3 metrics that we use for this, and they fall under code quality confidence, not specifically, code coverage or any kind of the very granular metrics, but a larger umbrella of, how confident are we in our code and product quality. Obviously, hopefully something near and dear to testers' hearts. Employee morale, just generally how are employees feeling about kind of their current state of things. And then something that my team calls transparent solutions over heroic individual action, which we'll get into what that means and what that kind of looks like. So code quality confidence. This is a metric that can be used as a leading predictor for escaped bugs. We're not confident in the code we're developing and building and shipping, very likely means that there are opportunities to miss quality problems. But it's also a trailing indicator of employee burnout. And that definitely can highlight, when a team is overloaded. Other reasons that we might see lack of confidence in the code, if it's coupled with a lack of initiative to improve the code, could be representative of apathy towards what's being built. We're not demonstrating the impact of what the team is working on. And so, finding it not a good fit between impact of the work and actually executing on the work can totally lead to kind of detachment from what's being built, and therefore not a strong sense of pride or confidence in what is being delivered. It can just be burnout. It can be too much is being asked. And so we're pumping out, sub-quality work compared to what our standards would normally be, and being asked to deliver things at a lower quality than we want can kind of erode not just confidence, but also motivation. So keeping a close eye on this through a variety of measures that you could employ, if you see it falling is a pretty clear sign that your team is disengaged and you should do something to turn that around. I've been asked how this can be measured, and there's obviously a variety of ways, and what works for your team could vary, but things we've seen or things we've put to use would be kind of like anecdotal feedback from team members. So that's kind of just like keeping a general pulse on how do people feel about what they're delivering, but also, more concrete things like the size of the tech debt backlog. Are you accumulating more tech debt than you're burning through? Are you constantly being asked to make compromises and just kind of shuffle those compromises into tickets that inevitably sit and don't get churned through? You can look at code coverage and just general test coverage trends and understand, like, are we able to keep up with testing our code and our feature and be as confident in it as we should before delivery? And also things like frequency of incidents or pager alerts without the ability to take proactive corrective action. So if your team is constantly getting paged or alerted that there's an issue with no real opportunity to get ahead of it and improve that, that's another reason we might see falling confidence. So employee morale, pretty obviously measuring the overall satisfaction of people in their role at work. We can track it quantitatively through surveys or questionnaires, offer team members the freedom to express their thoughts and ideas openly. If the responses we get to this are highly positive, we're going to want to determine what those contributing factors are and try to replicate them to make sure we can continue those trends. We can help enable other teams to be as happy and satisfied in the work as our team is. If it's negative, it would be really helpful to uncover and address the root causes of why people are having negative morale or feeling less than great about what they're doing day to day. As a manager, this is something that I try and listen for in common themes in my one-on-ones with team members, as well as in sprint retrospectives, to try and understand if there's systemic challenges that are being encountered that people don't necessarily feel empowered to act upon, and if we can kind of target those root causes for improvement. Something else that's come up is, this is a very interesting one, because the other piece to be wary of is if you have a disconnect between what your employees are saying or what the team members are saying and what the metrics say. So a disconnect in everybody smiling and saying things are fine, but a bunch of the auxiliary metrics we use telling us, hey, things don't seem fine. That's pretty indicative of not having a safe space and a safe place for team members to actually express their feelings. And that's something to be cautious of and probably dig in on, because that doesn't feel like you're allowing for open and honest communication, which is a detractor from employee morale. So it becomes a bit of a vicious cycle. And then, so transparent solutions over heroic individual action. This is kind of a Circle CI value. It's definitely a value on my team, but trying to enable a culture of productivity and team collaboration. When people are proud of their work and they're feeling safe in the space to do their work, they're more likely to work transparently and collaboratively. If we're in an environment like this, team members won't feel the need to hoard knowledge or kind of like retain impact for themselves and are more willing to work in the open. The benefits of that start to look like faster feedback and course correction when things aren't headed in the right direction. You start to see architectural and system design consistency and alignment just happen organically because more conversations are happening out in the open and less decisions are being made behind closed doors or in draft documents that aren't open to the team or whatever format that might take. And your just general team knowledge sharing and kind of spreading out a strong sense of ownership across the team is a huge win. Not having ownership silos formed by specific team members and having kind of that like individual SMEs who you have to have around to be able to answer questions about specific pieces of the system, that problem kind of goes away and you get an environment where the whole team can own any piece of the solution and work collaboratively to improve it. So one measure that we'll use for this is measuring how quickly changes or code changes make their way to code review, or how quickly like test builds make their way into testers' hands, or kind of anything that we can do where it would be hey, I've started this process and I'm at the end of this process and now I can show it to somebody else. We want to drag that line way up and have more eyes on code, more eyes on solutions, user experience early, so that we don't get too far down any given path before realizing that we need to correct and make a change and kind of result in a bunch of wasted time. And I think that's it in terms of the metric slides. Something that I guess this slide is here to represent. In Circle CI being a CI/CD platform, we obviously care about this. So we do have an insights feature, that's my team, which is really trying to capture a bunch of these metrics and help engineering teams improve their productivity. Obviously, anybody familiar with the DORA metrics would have looked at some of the velocity metrics we were talking about earlier and kind of see a bit of overlap there. But the metrics that we use, we're trying to expand kind of beyond those 4 DORA metrics into a few other things that take a bit of context into account and aren't necessarily just those individual specific data points. Anything else we wanted to say about this one, Blake, before we go to your wrap slide?
Nope.
Perfect.
But yeah, so these are all just the set of metrics that we've identified that I think are at least for us, most closely tied to successful teams. So really to distill it down and to add a few little last points, but looking beyond specific metrics, great teams aren't just reactive to metrics, but proactive in finding out where the business is headed and how the development team can project and plan accordingly for growth. So it's, our CEO says this a lot. It's we're not skating to where the puck is, we're skating to where it's going to be. It's really being aligned on a vision as a company of where we're going. So we're not constantly chasing our own tail, trying to figure out what to do next, but we can all proactively take a part in helping move the company or team or whatever unit you're a part of toward that longer term vision, and keeping morale up. Employees that are happy do better work. That's pretty obvious. It applies generally to every single industry that we could be a part of, but it really empowering them to make decisions, giving them the tools they need to make micro adjustments, to make even larger macro adjustments at the team level, and pushing that autonomy down the org chart so that teams know kind of where they're at, what they can do to get better, and having the tool set to iterate on making improvements. And then lastly, just having a blameless culture. Metrics, and this is very true to me and how I run teams. I know it's true to Graeme and his team specifically. we don't use metrics as a punishment. It's not here to say, hey, look, your chart went down this week. They're really used to be able to empower folks with knowledge of what's going on with their teams, what's going on with their processes. Knowing how your metrics work, knowing what your baselines are can help you predict for positive reasons. It can also help you predict for, oh, so-and-so was out last week or was going to be out next week because they're having a kid or global pandemic, people get sick. If we can account for those things, we can better steel ourselves against the rapid changes going on in the world and in our lives. So really using these metrics to illustrate issues and to lift people up and to index on the things that are working exceptionally well when they are. And kind of a running theme of all of this, just to put a little bow on it, is really driving towards more rapid change. If anything could sum it up, it's really trying to encourage folks to move more quickly, more confidently. And for us, that's really, you get more swings, you get more times up at the plate. Apologies for all the sports metaphors, but they're apt a lot of the time. But really, you get to place more bets, and it's you might not see as wild a success with any one bet when those bets are a lot smaller, but you're also protecting against any potential losses. So if you're, there is no magic number for any of these things. If your release cycle is 6 months, what's it going to take to get it to 5.5? If your release cycle is 2 weeks, what's it going to take to get it down to 5 days? Any incremental improvement is going to be obviously incrementally better on the bottom line. So yeah, with that, I think, Graeme, the next bit, what questions do folks have?
What kind of questions do you guys typically get with this talk? Do you get people that are like, you didn't mention my favorite metric that I use all the time? Or I know you've done this a couple times, so I'm just curious what people tend to pick out.
It's very particular to the group. So we've done this, we did a roadshow for a while and talked to a number of analysts and then did a panel on this topic for a more broad audience. And even amongst the analyst crews, there were wildly different questions. I think was the first or the second one, Graeme, where they said, so you're pitching us a piece of software, get to that point. And they were actually looking for the pitch, and we were just trying to say, and there is a single slide embedded in there about insights. But really, we were just, it's an impassioned plea for the entire business to start focusing on metrics as a source of knowledge instead of sort of cracking the whip for teams to move better or move more efficiently or whatever. It's about empowerment. It's not about punishment. And so it really does, it varies wildly between the audiences.
Cool. Well, we're an audience of people that are very passionate about quality, and I can see in the chat that there's a follow-up question about code quality confidence. So I think, Graeme, that was in your section. Do you want to take that one?
It was. I regret not having a fantastic answer for this. I want to say it's anecdotal, but a lot of the content of this deck did actually come from a team at CircleCI going and reaching out to CircleCI customers and speaking specifically with them and kind of corroborating stories and gathering a bunch of data. So there is, I don't think we have a slide on it here, but there is actually an ebook, I guess a short ebook you can download off the resources site on CircleCI where they kind of dive into those conversations a little bit more than in this slide deck. So it might touch a bit on that. But yeah, to be honest, I don't think we have any like specifically hard evidence that I can show you to make that case. You might have to feel it for yourself.
It might not be too hard to gather just some data in your own context to prove or disprove it. Like start measuring somehow code quality confidence and then also measure bugs and just kind of see how they line up. But yeah, it would be cool if there was like a body of data you could draw on. But looks like we've got something else in the chat here. Oh, which metrics could be sort of applied across multiple teams and actually are useful to compare across teams? Because I think a lot of the ones that you talked about today are probably more, only useful to compare with the same team over time.
I can speak to it from an organizational standpoint, and then you can speak to it from a team standpoint. So for me, and this is probably going to be wildly unhelpful, we don't compare teams intentionally. We will, and I like the way that you phrased it, so in a good, not blameless way, we will often look at implementations of things and what is working and what is not, and offer those things up as suggestions of other teams of improvements they might be able to adopt. But teams are made up of people of different backgrounds, of different experiences, of different experience levels. They've worked at different companies, they have different personalities, they have different desires of the way they want to work. And oftentimes we have, certainly in the product development world, we have teams that are dedicated towards working on a certain thing. So those two factors make comparing team A to team B wildly different. And even if you go down into specialties, we have two teams that are fundamentally UI teams, or two teams that are fundamentally deep backend data teams. The different makeups of the teams make those comparisons really difficult and potentially really dangerous. And so we don't want to weaponize these metrics against teams. And so really focusing on the act of measuring these things, less than the measurements themselves, less than the actual numbers that come out the other side, is the most important. So, Graeme does a really good job working with his peer group on picking out, oh, this is how we're doing story pointing. This is how we've conveyed that method to the team, and relaying the workflow that has worked for them, not, oh, we're doing 36 story points this sprint, and then I take that and go look at another team that's working on a UI thing, and well, you're only working on 16, but it's near incomparable because there are so many variables in there. So Graeme, if you want to talk about it from a team standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you were just saying at the end there was pretty much what I was going to say, which is it's the underlying experiments that you run to try and move these metrics are what's the more interesting output than the actual numbers. So I'm just trying to think of one example. We were not operating early in the team's days. We were not operating particularly predictably. And so you can see kind of wildly varying story point achievements across our sprints. And we decided to run an experiment and put a WIP limits or work in progress limits on our work in progress in a given sprint. And we actually made that half the number of active developers, which forced a lot of collaboration and pairing. And we had some junior engineers who were pretty against the experiment. It was like, no way could slowing the entire team down actually speed up our delivery and increase our predictability. So, we ran the experiment, and I think, if I remember correctly, our velocity went up about 3x over the next sprint, like very immediately. And it was a really fantastic result to the experiment that we wouldn't have run if we hadn't been looking at our metrics and decided that that was something we wanted to change. So that learning I have now taken to other teams. When I see people saying, hey, we're measuring our sprint velocity and it's all over the map and I'm trying to figure out what to do, I can offer up, our team was experiencing that and here's something we tried. And now people can, it's more evidence to try that experiment, but all they can do is run it and see if it works for their team or not. And if it doesn't, that's okay. There's no punishment for, well, it worked for us and not for you, so what are you doing wrong? But it gives people a good starting point to try and improve their own processes. So yeah, that's kind of how we use that. I think there was another one that I was thinking of when Blake was speaking, but it's gone now. So in summary, it's all about the trends, right? And using that to spark a conversation. Making sure people know, that's what it is. Making sure people know that this is an opportunity to run experiments and then attempt to improve, but with no punishment if the improvement isn't what was expected. And so that's where we want to be really careful about, we'll run this experiment, hey, the numbers got worse. The conversation isn't, look, now your metrics are worse, and that's a bad thing. It's, hey, we ran an experiment and this is good data we have as a result of that, and we'll just throw that process away and we won't do it again. So that's the way we approach this.
Yeah, and I think just top that off, consistency is the most important thing. And even between teams, if you ever get into a space where you want to try to meaningfully compare, it's being very clear about how you're measuring things. Lead time is a really interesting one to use, but can be wildly different. Is it literally from the time that somebody had an idea to the time that that idea is in production for all of our customers? Is it from the time that the ticket was created to the time that it hits production? Is it from the time that the ticket moved into start work to the time that it lands in the staging environment? So just making sure that we're measuring consistently every time we take a measurement for comparison's sake is probably the most important thing.
Some great thoughts in there. Anyone else want to get in with a question? We still have a few minutes. Will you be sharing the slide deck? That's an easy one, I guess.
Yeah, I think, I mean, the YouTube videos, I think if I recall correctly, as I should, KWSQA will post them, but we can find a way to make the slide deck available too. If you really want it, my email is pretty easy. You can either get me graeme.harvey@kwsqa.org or graeme@circleci.com, and I'd be happy to share it.
Yeah, that's a good point, that you can always access the recordings in the KWSQA YouTube channel, but if you're looking for just the slides, then I guess reach out to Graeme. Anyone else? All right. Well, thank you so much, Graeme and Blake. I know I was furiously taking notes about things I wanted to make sure to remember or share with my team or try in my team. And I think that's always a sign of a great talk. So we appreciate you coming out today and sharing your insights with us.
Awesome. Thanks.
Have a great day, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for having us.